Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our second session here at today's symposium. My name is Andrew Klump, and I am from the State Historical Society of Iowa. I work over in Des Moines, but I'm glad to be in Western Iowa. I grew up actually in Northwest Iowa, near Spencer, Sheldon area. So just head up 29 and then take 60 and you'd run right past my parents' house. So I'm always excited when I get to come over to Western Iowa. So great to be here today and introduce our session. Our session today is Early Developments of Council Bluffs, 1853 to the 1880s. And we've got three great presentations. And what we'll do today is I will introduce each presenter right before their talk. So we'll get started and I'll keep time, and then at the end we'll have questions. And at the end, I'll give a little introductory remarks on questions because I'll end up repeating them so that those who are joining us on Zoom can hear the question and we'll answer our questions. We've got a microphone there for that. So with that, let's make sure we have all the time we can for our presenters. Our first presenter is Janice Warm. Janice majored in history at the University of Minnesota and was employed as a paralegal for 34 years in Omaha with the attorney Leo Eisenstatt. Beginning in 1972. And she's continued on with different attorneys, Harry and Joyce Dixon, who also had offices in Omaha, Dallas, and Los Angeles. She has a strong interest and attended specific forums by MSCB Incorporated, which is a non-profit corporation that focuses on history education purposes, and she's served as secretary from 2011 and 12. And she's organized She organized and was a founder of, and board member and president of the West Coast of Iowa Incorporated. I'm sorry, I don't know why that's so hard for me to get out. With the state, she was part of the incorporation of that organization as well. So she will be giving our first talk today, and the title of her talk is different than the one that is printed in the program, so I'm going to read the most up-to-date one for you, but it is, and this is what she'll be presenting. So she'll be presenting History Tends to Mix Together Unlikely Characters and Events in What Was Once Unknown Places. Stories leading up to the founding of Kanesville. So with that, please help me in welcoming Janice today.
That is bright. Good morning. We are all participants in a celebration of the 175th anniversary of the Latter-day Saints' exodus across Iowa, the founding of Kanesville, and the granting of Iowa statehood, all in 1846. While the culmination of each of these events occurred in 1846, we know the stories behind each event had to have been years in the making. My name is Janice Warm. I am not a historian, but I do enjoy reading about history and writing stories based on my readings. Just say I'm a storyteller hoping to paint pictures in your mind with words. Let my stories take you back to early 1803. Think of our country in 1803. The Mississippi River belonged to France. The east coast of the Mississippi River was the west coast of the United States of America, sorry. Please close your eyes and imagine you are standing alone at a certain place beside a wide, muddy river and some unique hills far west of the Mississippi River. These lands the United States has just acquired from France under the name the Louisiana Purchase, lands that 43 years later we will call the state of Iowa. You shout, "What is this place?" But there is no one to answer. In your mind, you look around. You feel very alone. Civilization has not yet come here. You feel like you are standing in nowhere, and you begin to call it nowhere. Thank you. But you are not really there. Opening your eyes will bring you back to reality. No other single place in the United States would be the focal point for three historic and seemingly unrelated folk treks within a relatively short time. You wonder, when will civilization come to nowhere? Neither Lewis and Clark, fur traders, steamboat captains took any notice of this place because, of course, no one would notice nowhere. Yet history has a way of finding nowhere and leaves it with a storied past, stories just waiting to be told. We now move to the event of interest in the small village of Chicago, Illinois. One census listed only hundreds of residents. The supposed to have pictures here, I guess. The Ottawa, Chippewa, and Potawatomi are here with government officials to sign the Chicago Treaty of 1833, ceding the last of their Illinois and Wisconsin lands and their last reservations in Michigan to the United States. In return, the government is giving them 5 million acres of treaty lands within southwest future Iowa, extending further south into connecting Platte purchase lands. I'm not I forgot to use my clicker. While visiting treaty lands before their move, a party of Potawatomi shunned the future Iowa lands, including nowhere, saying there was scarcely timber enough for wigwams. There were no sugar trees, that some of the land was too poor for snakes to live upon, and that warlike tribes lived to the north. Later in 1835, the military, with maybe 40 wagons of food and needed provisions, escorted them across the Mississippi River south to their new lands. Starting out in a larger group, they will break off into smaller groups, following not, how do I get up to date? Okay. Where am I? Following not tribal chiefs, but only leaders. One group of the Potawatomi, led by a man they called Saganash, a friend and advisor, moved south of future Iowa to the Platte Purchase. Half English, half Mohawk Indian, he calls himself Captain Billy Caldwell, a title he earned much earlier while serving in the Indian Department of Canada. As early as 1833, the state of Missouri had claimed the Platte Purchase lands as part of their state, and thus, beginning in 1835, in an effort to make the Caldwell Potawatomi quit the Platte Purchase, the government begins working in ways to make life unbearable for them, including starvation. But general gains attached to nearby Fort Leavenworth brings reason to the Caldwell Potawatomi. In 1837, they find themselves moving to the southwest lands of future Iowa, beside a narrow creek located in, guess, you named it, nowhere. The Caldwell Potawatomi in nowhere are joined by a teaching farmer, a regiment of dragoons, and a subagent with the name of Dr. Edwin James. Later on, 3 Catholic priests arrived by steamboat, so they had a little company. Dr. James prepared a 3-page report on the terrain and also sketched a map of the treaty lands. That's a picture of the river. There's Chicago. Here's the Potawatomis. Oh, okay. And this shows you where the Platte Purchase is for the state of Missouri. And there is a map that shows what Dr. James was seeing when he mapped out the terrain of the treaty lands. He also estimated there were 2,500 Potawatomi under his care within 7 villages, but his short tenure as subagent ended later in 1838. Before long, only the Potawatomi live in nowhere, with its blockhouse overlooking a creek. Captain Caldwell had been living in his own house a few miles south until his death in 1841. Civilization has not come to nowhere. The Potawatomi have no incentive to build homes or make other improvements in their village we call nowhere, because they knew their tenure in Iowa was short-lived. And then now the territory of Iowa is seeking statehood. On June 5, 1846, the Potawatomi agreed to a new treaty, terms with ratification in July of 1846. They will make the move quietly and dignified in small groups to the Kansas lands within the allowed 2 years. The removal of these Potawatomi plays a huge role in Iowa's history. Statehood, no doubt, could not happen while the Potawatomi held on to 5 million acres of now territory of Iowa lands. 5 million acres is big enough to be a state all by itself. Hearing this story, you'll see first how this first historic folk trek played a role in one of the events happening in 1846 as being portrayed in this symposium, the granting of Iowa statehood. Within that same period, June, July 1846, the initial body of a people called Latter-day Saints began arriving at this treaty lands near the east coast of the Missouri River. The beginnings of the second historic folk trek had found its way to Nauvoo, Illinois, from Nauvoo, Illinois, to the eastern shores of the Muddy River, a folk trek made under duress. If you remember, the Potawatomi Indians had soldiers and 40 wagons to help them get there. The story of Kanesville is their story. They were the founders of Kanesville, but first they must find nowhere. Their story, as it might have been told by one of the Mormon men, begins in early 1846. Following the 1844 murder of our leader, Prophet Joseph Smith, we knew we had to leave our Nauvoo homes for an unknown place far to the west. Our plan unfolded with no maps, guidebooks, no concept of travel miles, terrain, enemies, and no government help. We will leave in late spring, when grass would be available to feed our animals. We build 2,500 covered wagons, transport up to 15,000 people, and lay in a list of provisions, big list of provisions required for each wagon. And we planned to cross the Missouri River at a ferry just north of St. Joe, Missouri. All that changed in 1846. Our governor can no longer protect us. Our trek to the west will begin not in a late spring, but on a freezing cold wintry day of March 1, 1846, ready or not. We are not ready. Throw our list of provisions away. We haven't time to gather everything in quantities. With only 500 wagons built, some only farm wagons, a vanguard train carries hundreds of our families. Helped to move west across the Mississippi River through a scant number of towns, then further westward into this end of civilization as we know it. Enduring the bitterly cold winds and icy snows of winter's end, followed by heavy spring rains creating tortuous miles of deep mud, seemingly hopeless, we keep moving on. We have no choice. We hoping to protect those that we had left behind who were unprepared to leave. We must prove to our enemies our intentions that all Mormons will eventually leave Nauvoo. Little did we know that sooner or later we would enter the treaty-acquired lands of the Potawatomi, but we have nothing to fear. The Potawatomi welcome us and send us on our way towards the Missouri River, bordering their lands. Moving ever westward towards the river, hungry, weary, physically ill, and sick at heart, I can barely hold my head up. I have seen our original party struggling to survive. I have seen babies, children, women, and men die along the route. My food supply lacks any nutrition. These miles of Iowa had been crossed that we were crossing were a combination of low hills and flatlands. Just now, I raised my head, and I am shocked to see tall hills before us. I take a deep breath. Have we reached an impasse? Is it possible for our wagons to ascend these hills? Our leaders determine a path forward. We reach a lower summit in mid-June. Looking ahead was like turning life's page. There in the distance, we see the wide, muddy river they call the Missouri, and I was filled with great joy. Here where the territory of Iowa Indian lands meet the river, we might be safe. It is mid-June 1846 when Brigham Young and others in our party meet with locals in some of the Potawatomi near a trading post on the east side of the river. They are curious yet friendly. Their interpreter welcomes us with these kind words. The Potawatomi comes sad and tired into this inhospitable Missouri bottom not many years back when he was taken from his beautiful country, which had abundant game and timber and clear water everywhere. Now you are driven from your lodges. We must help one another. You can live on any part of our land not actually occupied by us. We are safe. So now it's me talking. Having heard the Mormons' story to this point, you see how this second historic folk trek, in fact, was one of the events actually being celebrated that happened in 1846 is being portrayed, the Latter-day Saints' exodus across Iowa. Now they are feeling safe at the Indian lands bordering the Missouri River. They still have not found nowhere, but they will. So back to the story with our Mormon gentleman. Brigham Young and our other leaders, together the quorum of 12, find a place in the hills where we can group our wagons and they can discuss our dire situation. We call this the Grand Encampment. Our travel plan has completely unraveled. Changes in our circumstances have created consequences. We should have left the Missouri River behind 2 months ago. But look at us. Our people, our animals, our wagons, our supplies, and our funds, bad. Everything is bad. We are in no condition to travel on. But now we must build our own large ferry here on the river bordering the Indian lands, a time-consuming task. Actually, I'm just dry. I didn't know how to talk. And there is more. Earlier in May of '46, our elder Little had met Colonel Kane in Philadelphia for the first time, telling him of our need for President Polk's help in our immigration to the West. Colonel Kane took up our cause, and when war was declared on Mexico in May of 1846, President Polk seeks at least 500 U.S. military enlistments from our young men, with a promise each would receive government pay for their services. A military officer, accompanied by Colonel Kane, comes to hoping to recruit enlistees. Brigham Young encourages our young men to enlist. Reluctant at first, 500 do enlist. They need the money, we need the money. So now the 500 men and 31 women designated as laundresses will leave us in July to march on foot to San Diego, California, leaving behind their extended families and 500 driverless wagons. Now there is no doubt, no lengthy travel westward over the mountains is possible this year. With the new ferry operating in July, Brigham Young and most of the Quorum of 12 with thousands of others crossed the Missouri River to spend the winter on lands of the Omaha with their approval and the approval of the U.S. government. Their settlement is called winter quarters. We remain at our grand encampment until we have to leave because there is enough grass for our animals and wood and water for all of us. So gradually the grand encampment breaks up. And Henry Miller goes down that road right there, and and that's north, and it takes him upon himself to claim some property where he could park his covered wagon near a creek in an old block house. Now, it's me again. Unbeknownst to him, Henry Miller has happened upon nowhere. But how would he know? It is nothing more than a small Indian village with a creek and an old block house sitting on a hill. Some Potawatomi are still living there. The rest of the story encompasses the founding of Kanesville. And now we're back to our Mormon gentleman talking. I choose to make my temporary home near Henry's claim. As the area grew in numbers, it acquired the name Miller's Hollow. Others spread out in small groups claiming camps in a 60-mile radius to the north, east, and south of Miller's Hollow continue to live in their wagons or tents, even some in caves. We are nearing the end of the disastrous year of 1846. I almost forgot to tell you, Iowa statehood will be granted on December 28, 1846. We're moving into 47. We're all waiting for spring and the continuation of our trek westward. Then our leaders announce a new plan in April. Once the spring grasses are plentiful enough for the livestock to cross to the west, Brigham Young will leave with an expeditionary party of around 150 people. So Brigham Young goes west. We stay in nowhere. Brigham Young's party returns, and with a bunch of resolutions, the Mormons living in winter quarters would leave or move back east. Brigham Young would be sustained at the first presidency. Orson Hyde would become president of the Quorum of 12, and Henry Miller will serve. There was a new plan for us, too, to organize and develop a town site in Miller's Hollow and plant a lot of crops for a lot of people. We are busy in keeping with the 1847 plan. This is hard for us. First, we were so ready, yet not going west in 1847. Now we are not going west in 1848. In our hearts, we're ready to move on, yet in our minds, we understand the need for us to stay. Kanesville, the name Miller's Hollow is changed to Kane and then to Kanesville. And Kanesville becomes the hub and what I think of the downtown of the 70 or more outlying villages. And then we heard the news of the century. Gold was discovered in California. Well, not only was gold discovered in California, Kanesville was discovered near the Missouri River in the state of Iowa. So I've got to go skipping ahead here for a bit. So that was the third historic folk trek. And when they begin to arrive, all those gold seekers heading for California and all those non-Mormon people from the east seeking new homes in Kanesville and opportunities for establishing new business. How did they hear about Kanesville? How did they find Kanesville? Maybe by word of mouth, but when they came, for whatever reason, these new folk trekkers were flooding Kanesville, and our economy boomed. We had quite a settlement going in Kanesville between 18 and 1852. Kanesville was recognized by the state government. It became the county seat of Pottawatomie County in 1851. Then comes 1852. Word came down from Brigham Young. All the Mormons living in Kanesville and throughout Iowa are needed in the Great Salt Lake Valley. Approximately 5,500 saints take to the trail in 1852. So our story, with fear and trepidation at its beginning, of success and satisfaction at its ending, the in-between story of Kanesville and its surrounding communities is undoubtedly unparalleled in U.S. history. While Kanesville might have been considered a religious settlement at the time, it was really only a stopping point on a very long trek to the Great Salt Lake Valley for the Latter-day Saints. For Council Bluffs, it was the beginning. And here is a picture of them leaving. 1852, the call has come. We must join the others in the west beyond the mountains. Goodbye, Kanesville, goodbye, Janice. You may have not been our destiny, but we leave you with our legacy and our stories. Thank you very much.